Hi everyone. Right, so I have purchased a large amount of table space as a bit of kind of lockdown madness, as you were. I've long wanted to wargame the Battle of Rorke's Drift using the black powder rules, and I've got a lot of thoughts on how to do it, but space and size and the dimensions of your table are a significant consideration when doing it. So, as I say, I decided to go for it in terms of some kind of fairly significant expense to get some good quality tables and get as many as I could physically fit into my front room, which obviously is going to cause quite a bit of disruption for a while. I've had to move a lot of the furniture in my house around, and I can just about get around this table to to go about my everyday kind of activities and so on, and push the television into the corner of the room and the armchair into another corner, and I'll have to watch telly in the evenings that way. But I've got the time to do it. Obviously, I haven't got any other considerations of people I share the house with or anything, and it's going to be a good way of passing some of the lockdown time. So I've got the camera on the tripod at the moment, and I'll give you a little tour of the setup and so on in a moment. But just to kind of reiterate a few things I said on a video quite a few years ago now, the Defenders of Rorke's Drift, where I showed you my British Army. I'm of the opinion really that if you're going to wargame Rorke's Drift, the buildings are the key element of the game, and because of that, you've got a choice really of either reducing the dimensions of the buildings down to fit them onto a reasonable sized table, or you've got to represent the buildings as in the scale that you're doing at the actual size that they were at the time. And I own the Redoubt models of Rorke's Drift, which are a very good representation of the buildings as they were. I'll show you their detail a little bit later, but they're obviously kind of quite large, and if you then scale down on the number of figures that you use, the actual defensive perimeter looks very bare. So in other words, if you're using buildings that are at one-to-one scale, you really have to treat it in a way as a massive skirmish game and have one-to-one figure scale for the figures as well, which then gives you another added problem, because it's reasonably easy to do that with the British, because I think there's about 120 defenders at Rorke's Drift, but the Zulu opposition was over 4,000 strong, and I don't know anyone who's got an army of 4,000 Zulus. But I have now, I've got about 450 Zulu figures. You can see them some of them in the distance there. And my second kind of conclusion really, after my decision that I was going to wargame it in a one-to-one scale, was that in black powder, the army morale breaks when you get to half the size of the army. So in other words, 2,000 lost and the other 2,000 will automatically come off the table. So I thought, well, okay, really then I only need to represent 2,000 Zulus, and not play that rule, just say that they've lost the game if they're all removed from the table. And then that makes it a lot easier because, again, as you'll see, I hope in a little while, if you put 2,000, if you put 2,000 figures up against or around the perimeter of the defences at Rorke's Drift, it would be stacked up. They would go around several times, more than several times. So in other words, this was the key to the defence of Rorke's Drift was to compact the whole frontage down so that as few as possible Zulus actually were able to be face to face with the British defenders. So in other words, the target was narrowed down so it was deeper rather than wider. So effectively, you're only going to get about 400 or so figures at any one time up against the defences. So that's perfect for the size of the army I've got. So all I'm going to do is say that the Zulus are going to be allowed 5 attacks. So in other words, that represents over 2,000 figures, and basically play it so that the first attack comes from the south side, which is what happened in reality. The second attack comes from the north side, which is the angle that you're looking at it from at the moment. Then the third attack will be either the third or the fourth attack will be a nighttime attack. I'll probably make the fourth attack a nighttime attack. So the third attack, I'll let the Zulu side choose which side they want to attack from, but I suspect it'll be from the north again. And then the fifth attack will be the final attack in the early hours of the morning. And from the British point of view, I'm not going to play the rule that if they get down to half the army size they break. They had no option but to stand and fight, really, so that isn't a realistic rule. I'm going to have it that there are 4 separate units here, so I suppose you could call them platoons. Each one is a platoon. 2 of them are going to be commanded by Bromhead. 2 of them are going to be commanded by Dalton, the commissary, and the entire force, the overall commander, is going to be Chard. So when they get down to 2 units, I'm going to say that they then have to occupy just the area in front of the storehouse around the redoubt, which in reality in the battle is actually what happened. They soon abandoned the area that you can see to your right, which is separated off from the other side by a line of biscuit boxes. They soon abandoned the hospital and that side and did constrict their perimeter down even tighter just to the left-hand side there. And then if they get down to 1 platoon left on the table, then they're obliged to defend from the redoubt, which you can see. I know you can't see. I'll show it to you in a moment, which is in front of the storehouse. So basically what I'm going to do is just try out all my ideas. I'm going to play Black Powder. The Black Powder did bring out, or Warlord Games did bring out a supplement for Zulu. Some of the aspects of it I like, some of the special rules I don't. I'm not going to incorporate them, and I'm going to incorporate some of my own. In their case, they solved the problem of size by playing it on an 8 foot by 4 table. I've got 10 foot by 6 here. Yeah, so they play it on an 8 foot by 4 table, and they actually do admit that they physically reduce the footprint of the buildings and then only have 50 figures representing the British defenders, and that to me just visually doesn't look and feel right. So as I say, I've chosen to go for a 1-to-1 figure scale. There are other things I'm not keen on, like they have a kind of way of winning VCs for various characters on the table. I'm not going to bother with that, and I'm gonna incorporate some of my other thoughts on it as well. Setting fire to the buildings. I'm going to allow one section or platoon to occupy any building if they wish, but for it only to be able to fight from two sides of the building. And in the supplement, what they do is they have all the rooms separate and treat them as a group of separate buildings, which in terms of fitting the figures in is not very easy to do. So I didn't like that idea. Anyway, I'm going to take the tripod off the table now and give you a little tour of the battlefield. Okay, so this is looking down the length of the table. So it's 6 foot in width, and you can see the buildings occupy nearly 5 foot of that. There's just over 6 inches on either side of the table. There's a lot of space down this end at the moment. I've got some books laid out here, just to give you some of my ideas. I mean, this is a sketch map of the charred sketch of the battle, and there's a mountain over this side on the south, the Shiani, and there was musket and rifle fire down onto the defenders. So I'm not representing the mountain, but I have got a small unit of Zulu figures that are going to be firing in between the attacks onto the defenders, and probably only being able to hit these guys on the north side, because there's cover from the buildings on the south, and sort of play out a little exchange of gunfire in between each assault, and see if that has any effect. In fact, in historical reality, a lot of the casualties were caused by gunfire rather than by stabbings and slashings and so on. This is a map that I really like. Shows you how the defences were laid out. There's another map in here somewhere of the actual outline of the hospital building. Yeah, here it is. So this is exactly how the building was laid out, and you'll see in a moment that this is how the model is laid out as well. I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. This is the supplement, which, as I say, I like it. Don't get me wrong, I do like this supplement. It's just I don't like a lot of the rules for Rorke's Drift in it. So I'm going to go with my own concoction. And I just thought I'd mention this because I watched this fairly recently. It's a pretty good DVD. There are 3 sections to it. The discussion on Rorke's Drift, though, I found really odd, because I've always gone with sort of Ian Knight's analysis, really, that Commissary Dalton has really been overlooked in the past, and it was he who had the fighting knowledge and experience, even though he wasn't a commissioned officer at that time. He wasn't in the army. He was a commissary in the supply. But it was he that really said to Chard and Bromhead, "Look, you've really got to form a ring and have your soldiers shoulder to shoulder, concentrate their rifle fire and defend a very narrow perimeter. And he did win the VC, but he's portrayed in the film Zulu as a very kind of foppish, effete kind of character. He wasn't at all. He was very, as I say, he had more experience of fighting than Chard and Bromhead. But in this DVD, he gets no mention whatsoever, absolutely no mention. And in fact, one of the narrators in it, one of the people interviewed, is a descendant of Bromhead, who talks about really how brilliantly the military strategy, was concocted. But he kind of portions all the credit to Bromhead and possibly to Chard. Obviously, he's got family loyalty there. But I suspect the other reason was that he was ex-army, and I wonder whether there's a sort of there's a matter of military pride and regimental pride there that the officers commanding the defence weren't the ones with the initiative to come up with this very successful plan. Anyway, it's just my opinion. But yeah, in that DVD, let's go over to the models. In that DVD, Dalton doesn't get mentioned, but this chap does. Chaplain Smith, who basically kept the troops' spirits up and kept running up and down the lines, handing out ammunition and so on. Clearly, important role. But to ignore Commissary Dalton, this chap here, altogether, seems to me wrong. I mean, history should really be giving him a greater prominence. But anyway, here we go then. So you can see, all right, they wouldn't have been in double file, but you can see how they're, even with 100 and odd figures, the footprint of the defences leaves a lot of bare spots. This is with all the figures outside. This is before you put any figures inside the buildings. As I say, with the buildings, what I'm going to do is only allow one unit to occupy a building and then for it to be able to fire out of two sides. So I'm going to represent the two sides that it will be fired out with these kind of figures. Which opposition of the appropriate sides. So this is the kind of structure inside the model, and you can see how kind of compartmentalised it was. Not at all suitable really to be used as a hospital, because all the doors, there are very few internal doors. All the doors are actually on the outside of the building, and this is why the fighting in the building and so on was particularly terrifying. It's because there is no, the Zulus just came straight up to these doors and battered them down, and then the defenders were, one or two to a room. One of the VCs was one in this particular room here, which you can see, so that this is why they had to make gaps in the wall and try and escape that way, and eventually got out of that wall there into the perimeter. But yeah, I mean, I'm going to have to find a way of kind of. I think there is a rule in the Black Powder supplement about making holes in the partitions, so I'll probably adopt that. I've got some little models to represent holes in walls that I did a long time ago, so I'll use those. I'm using the Warlord wagons, which I really like, rather than the ones that came with the Redoubt model. But they're quite large. Again, it goes back to this thing about scale and dimensions and footprints and so on. Because I won't take you back to the map, but there was actually 2 wagons and a short line of mealie bags here, but physically haven't got, you know, enough room to kind of represent those, so I've just got 2 wagons there, so slightly unrepresentative of what it actually looked like. You can see the back of the hospital, or the south side of the hospital, doesn't have any access other than that door there, and that door there just leads into an area where Rorke used to have his wagons and so on. So it's not as vulnerable as the doors on the other side. There's a water cart, which again, that's a warlord model, but it often doesn't get mentioned. But when the defenders were forced into that side over the biscuit barrels, they left the water cart behind, and obviously as the battle wore on and the night came, they really needed a water supply. So some of the VCs were actually won by soldiers coming back over and fighting in the dark with the Zulu hordes in this area here to get the water cart back to the defenders. Oh yeah, I forgot to say as well that there was a ledge here. So what I've done is represented that by putting a lot of the packaging that came in very handy with the tables. So I've lifted the mat up there so that you can see how it's a much more formidable defence, other than just a barricade of mealie bags. So that's, I've got it about the equivalent of a figure height, but in fact I think it was a little bit more than that. This is how Corporal Sheese won his VC, because there was kind of crevices and so on where the Zulus were able to shelter from gunfire in the cracks and so on, and Sheese actually leapt over the barricade and kind of dispatched a lot of the Zulus by fighting and killing them, while they were trying to take shelter there. Again, that's an error in the film that he's portrayed as. There's a wonderful scene, I love the scene, don't get me wrong, where he comes out of the hospital bashing the Zulus about with his crutch and so on, but it wasn't like that at all. That guy there represents Sheese. Right, let's take you over the other side here. So the kraal isn't particularly good. It's just 4 walls. So I think that they decided not to even kind of man that really right from the start. But it's not particularly good representation or good model. There's no gates or anything like that. The redoubt may well just have been a pile of mealie bags that had been put there, which they were taking to build the defences, and it was only a redoubt in name, and they piled on top of it in the end rather than inside it. There is a sketch, again I won't show you now, that does show, I think it was from Coloured Sergeant Bourne, who made a sketch, and it does show it just as literally a pyramid of mealie bags. There's Surgeon Reynolds there. I have shown a lot of these on an earlier video, so maybe I shouldn't witter on too long, but once the hospital had been abandoned, he treated the wounded on that kind of veranda of the storehouse. Yeah, so basically that's all my ideas on the defence. So over here, there are other things, little items in the model that I quite like the oven and the cookhouse, and there's an outside loo there. About where that loo is, there was a ditch, and when the Zulus did actually manage to break in through those doors, one of the defenders in the confusion actually got out. I think it might have been because he wasn't wearing a red jacket, and the Zulus were intent on killing anyone wearing a red coat. So there was a ditch running alongside that outside loo, and he hid in that for the rest of the battle. That must have been terrified with thousands of Zulus in that area. And over here, I've got 4 regiments of Zulus. Each section of the regiment, some of them are slightly different sizes, is going to have an induna. So there's no danger really of them, or not much danger of them failing command tests and so on. So you can see there's command figures for every section, and then there's an overall commander on horseback, Dabalamansi. So he's the overall commander, and I've got some. This is the group that I'm going to have just representing the people firing from the Shiani slopes, terraces. Just take you over the other side and give you a look from the other angle. Sorry, I'm having to be careful here because there's very little space in the room around this table. As I say, I'm very lucky to have the liberty to cause this much disruption. Yeah, so this is the unmarried regiment. Forget the names of them all, forgive me. All the British redoubt figures, but the Zulu army is a real motley collection of redoubt, foundry, empress, warlord, Perry. I think that's all of them. And I haven't got them on the table, but I've got lots of casualty figures, so I'm going to use those to represent disorder and what's the other one where you lose points for? Can't remember what they call it. But anyway, there's 2 types of marker you need. I'm going to use it in various shields and so on. Got lots of spare shields for running out of ammo and disorder and such like. Right, okay, so it's going to be a while. I'm going to spend quite a long time, playing out various ideas and so on. So I'm not going to show you any of that. But when I've found up all my ideas for the battle, I will actually play it out as a full-length war game, and I'll give you a battle report on that. So something to look forward to, but it's going to be a while. Probably a couple of weeks, maybe even, and then the game itself is going to take quite a long time. Oh yeah, so that was the other thing I was going to say. That I do want to be able to set fire, not literally, but represent this hospital catching fire. So I might have to design some rules for the Zulus to be able to set fire to the building. I think there is something in the Black Powder rules. But yeah, okay. Thanks very much for watching, everyone. Look forward to putting out another video on this subject, but in between I think there's going to be quite a lot of other videos I put up on things that I'm painting at the moment, because I'm going to take my time and do this quite leisurely. As I say, good way to spend the lockdown. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.